Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening. Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm a nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
Yeah, this is Phil Stevens. I'm a power lifter, strength coach, run Strength Guild, and a bunch of other stuff.
Hey, it's Dr. Mike Nelson, owner of Extreme Human Performance, faculty member at the Kerrig Institute, creator of the Flex Diet Cert, and a bunch of other fun stuff.
All right, folks, we have, well, I'm going to be frank with you. With university starting, it's affecting all of us in different ways. I just heard you guys talking about that, by the way, when I was grabbing coffee.
Yeah.
So we have mail and news building up on us, so we're going to get through a couple of mails, some Facebook comments from our listener crew. And then the news, there's sort of a theme here, which is almost like negativity. It's like paranoia. And we're going to bring our usual sort of, war-scarred, salty veteran viewpoint on this. I think we just need to pump the brakes a little bit on a lot of this stuff. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that are, it's controversial. Like, first you hear it's not bad for you, then you hear it's terrible, you can't consume any of it, So we're going to talk about some of that stuff, a little commentary. Phil, but let's start with like the direct lifting news. So you've got some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Strength and muscle sport news.
Yeah, so I spent the weekend there was two big meets this weekend. There was Boss of Bosses, and then I was down at the Tribute IPL meet in San Antonio, Texas. So went down there, one of my lifters was lifting. Huge day. It was an invite-only meet, a lot of cash given out. I'm trying to think, just roughly, I think there was like 50, 60,000 given out total.
Wow.
At least that. Because you were looking at $12,500 for first place man and first place woman, $4,000 for second, I think $2,000 for third. But on 2 days. So day one was classic raw, which is wraps. Day two is the new raw category, which is sleeves. But no, it's amazing lifts. And again, like I've said before, it's the women were the women sold the show. Like I was talking to one of my other lifters, Dal, and it's like the women's Wilks is now broken because they are just crushing. They're going to have to redo that thing. They outlifted everybody. You're talking like mid 600 Wilks going on compared to like Brian, who did good. My lifter, he took second. I think he had like a 555 Wilks after squatting 8. What did he squat? 876, benched 507, and deadlifted 880. So
wow.
Yeah, it was good. But I mean, it wasn't the day that we wanted. A few things went on. I think obviously Brian was really nervous, and I've never seen him this way. He's been in one big meet before, which was Record Breakers. But at that, it was pretty chill because there was no expectations. It was like, hey, this is my first big meet. I'm going to go out here and have fun. At this one, we had definite goals in mind, and there was $12,500 on the line. So Brian's a trooper. He did good. We lowered his opener. We were going to open at 903. We went to 876, and he messed up his first one. He came out there and didn't have his belt latched up, and like I said, nerves were just all over the place. Came back and crushed that, and then took his third at 903 and just went way too low and missed that. But after that, we got him settled down. And for Brian's not he's not a hype him up lifter, smack him around, get him screaming and yelling. He's more of he needs to be joking and laughing and messing with people. To be in the right mind.
Like disengaged, maybe. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, just having a good time. Like when he squatted 903 easy at the last meet, literally he was up there on the platform waiting for them to load it, poking jokes and having fun with people. And then just walked over and squatted like it was nothing. And that's where he needs to be, is in that zone. And he was just he wasn't there. He was being quiet and sitting by himself, and so we got him loosened up after that. And bench went amazing. The whole prep he'd been had some aches and pains and things weren't going well, so we opened light, but hit 507 like it was nothing on bench. And at this point now we're playing the numbers because we didn't get the squat we wanted, and opened it, like I said, 880, I think it was on deadlift, and hit that fine, hit that easy. Went to 903, and got called on a soft lockout, a little bit of a controversial call. Basically, he stood up with it really fast and then rebent his knees a little bit after the lockout. And they called it on that, which, I mean, it is one of the rules, so I'm not going to get it on them. You can obviously see there's a little knee bend, but so I got called on that, and then he was a little he tried to do something that he probably shouldn't do, and that's change the way he lifts for his third attempt at a big meet with 900 pounds. And essentially he ended up trying to stiff-legged deadlift 903 pounds. And that didn't work. So anyways, it was a great day. You know, we got in the eyes of a lot of people. Got to meet I got to meet like CC Holcomb and things like that, people I hadn't met in person, and talk a lot. And Brian ended up taking second. So I mean, he still walked away with $4,000, and he was the heaviest squat of the day, heaviest deadlift of the day. He might have been the heaviest deadlift of the weekend even, and squat of the weekend. So it turned a lot of heads, gained a lot of followers. So now it's move on, and we chalked that up as experience, in a big meet, and going for money, which is a more and more usual now, which is pretty awesome in powerlifting. Like people were asking me, how much money did you compete for? I was like, we competed for plastic trophies, bro. This money thing is real new. We didn't have any of that. We competed for bragging rights. So it's neat. It's neat to see this. I mean, when somebody can come in and make Kevin Oak won $12,500. Let's say he rides on that and finds another one here in a couple months, and maybe he can win another $12,000. You do that 4 or 5 times a year, you got something going on. So, especially if you got sponsors backing you and like paying for travel and things.
You make a living out of it almost,
Yeah, exactly. So there was a 148er. There was a 148-pound man that deadlifted. He just missed 633. I think he hit 620.
Wow.
That was pretty amazing. There was a 118-pound girl that pulled over 400. A 12-year-old girl that deadlifted 315.
A 12-year-old girl?
A little 12-year-old girl deadlifted 315.
This is making me ashamed.
Yeah. I mean, there were numerous girls in the 600 pulls. It was pretty amazing. And like they were all squatting 400 plus. So yeah, it was pretty legit, man. Seeing that go on. The funniest part of the day, I don't know the guy's name. There were several lifters from out of the country there. There was a Russian guy in our flight. He was a couple lifts before Brian, and he took his third deadlift and he starts yelling in Russian. And then of course, no one in the crowd knew what the hell he was saying. So the announcer just takes it in his own hands, and he said he said he loves this country. I love America. He runs to the back room and starts throwing shit, and everybody's cracking up. But he just tried to play in light of the situation, But it was a good time. So
awesome.
It was fun. It's neat to see these meets. It was very well ran. It went fast. We were done started at 9, got done by 3.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, it was very well ran. The crew down there that runs the Texas for USPA and IPL did a really good job.
Phil, if I can
go ahead.
If I can ask, that's got to mean better performances, you would think, instead of dragging it out. Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah.
Like if you can wrap up by 3, you're going to get overall better work than if people are just strung out by like 6, 7 p.m. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. And, I mean, you still had plenty of rest. I mean, like they were only running 2 flights, but that still meant you had, like on bench, in between squat and bench, they still gave us an extra 15, 20 minutes. So you still had an hour and a half, in between each event to get rested a little bit, get something to eat, get warmed up. And they were very lifter conscious. I've been to meets where it's like, okay, we start right after this flight's over. And then you've got big guys like Brian, and there were several guys there opening in the 800s. it takes a while to get warmed up. So they came back and checked on us, and at one point they gave us an extra 5 minutes. They wanted to make sure, okay, the situation's good for the lifters, which makes sense to me, as long as they're not being, just outwardly taking their time and being assholes.
It's not like you're asking for another hour.
No, it's like it's 5 minutes. We're here all day. Give me 5 minutes. Let me take one more temp, and we'll be ready to go. So they were real good at that. They live streamed the whole thing. It was good. They brought in. It was at a hotel, but there was a freaking tractor trailer outside with a huge air conditioner on it, pumping air in there. So they brought in like extra air conditioning.
Oh, cool.
It was awesome. Because normally it's like hotter than hell in the back room. So yeah, I mean, it was one of the best ran meets I've ever been to, and I've been to numerous worlds and things like that. So yeah, it was a good time. So, and lots of big lifts taken. So neat to see.
That's cool. Now, how raw was this? Like
Brian's.
Well,
Brian
when you're saying you're reading off some of those numbers, it just makes me wonder, like, what kind of gear did they have and all that kind of stuff,
Well, day 2 with the girl that deadlifted over 400 or 118, and the guy, they get a belt.
Okay.
That's it.
I'm trying to save my ego, right?
No, there's no saving it. Day 2 was Brian lifts and sleeves only, so no wraps, no nothing.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so it was legit. So
okay.
Just a belt and a singlet. Sorry, Lonnie.
Yeah, right. Sorry to say, this is all like raw. This is real.
There was some impressive lifts. I mean, there was a guy that's, I don't remember his bench exactly, but it was around 470 at 220.
Big.
Tall kid. He wasn't like one of those spark plugs that's just jacked. That's 5'6" and 220.
Yeah, you often hear people say, well, the arc when they bench is like 2 inches. Well, not for that guy, right?
This guy was he was very much out benching what he looked like. So yeah, it was impressive.
That's
I think
fun,
he pulled in the 7s. So yeah, it was a good time. Good time.
Love it. Good stuff. Did you pick up anything? I mean, you've done this many, many times, but big numbers, efficient meet. Anything for like an event organizer, like tidbits? I mean, I guess the truck with the AC was a cool little trick, but
just that. I mean, I think one of the best things about it, I really like these meets that are thrown at hotels, because basically you go upstairs and sleep, and then you just come downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go anywhere. It's right there. It was a nice hotel, and they, everything was in one spot. I mean, if you needed to, you could have not left the hotel. So that's nice as a lifter. You don't have to wake up and then travel across town and then do this and then, I need to get my stuff out of my room before it closes, blah, 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 blah.
Right. While the event is held at like a high school or something?
Yeah.
Right.
So, that was nice. And just the way they ran it was good feed, and just very efficiently ran. They had good helpers. I think the best meets always have extra help. You don't plan on 10 guys showing up to help when you need 10. You better have 15 to 20. So,
yeah.
Like things like that. The warm-up equipment was spot on. So that was a good time.
So worth the drive.
Warm-up areas, they throw 100 people into this small room with 2 bars and be like, have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also they didn't try to overpack this thing. So a lot of meets is 3 or 4 flights. They just broke it down to 2 flights each day. So both days were done by 3, which was kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
I've been at meets where it's 10:30 at night and we're freaking finally deadlifting. But yeah.
Yeah. So. If you want performances to boast about, and then carry on the meet, right? Better performances, people are more excited to come back next year, and then do it efficiently and don't just destroy your athletes with inefficient, scheduling and stuff, programming.
Yeah. Hopefully they can keep this going. And like I said, this was an invite-only meet because it was a international meet, but it was a fun time.
Good stuff. All right. Let's get into some listener mails. I have some. We'll start with a light one, and then I've got sort of a heavy one. A friend of mine contacted me, Dave. He knows Fortress really well. But let me start with the lighter one here, and we can answer some of these questions. We'll do a little bit of the Facebook stuff, and then after the break, we'll talk about all these concerns that are in the news, I guess. Changing public opinion with one comment kind of thing. But this one is Matt. He says, Hey, love your show. Thanks for reading my email on Iron Radio the other day. I've got an exercise physiology question for you, and I think any of us could answer this, but 2 days ago on a lark, I decided to take the stairs down from my office on the 58th floor. No problem at the time. Now I'm damn near an invalid from the DOMs in my calves. Far worse than anything I've experienced even after 10 sets of heavy calf raises. What's going on here? Was this effectively like 1,000 negatives? Let me take the first stab at this. We just did, we're setting up our first lab in an advanced ex-phys class, and it's about eccentric contractions, right? Lengthening, breaking contractions, and DOMs, right? Delayed onset muscle soreness and what happens and all that. The short answer, Matt, yes, you did 1,000 negatives with your body weight, right? And you are wrecked. The neat thing about eccentric exercise, and I did my dissertation with this stuff, and again, we all know this, but when you lengthen contractions, you fire motor units a little bit differently, so oftentimes there's fewer fibers taking the load. The initial mechanical trauma, it does happen, but you don't feel it right away because there's sort of a second, more metabolic phase where you get like neutrophils move in almost immediately, like white blood cells, and they start secreting, cytokines and things like that. They're soldiers, right? I mean, neutrophils, and later you get like other white blood cells move in, like monocytes and macrophage. They become macrophages. There's a lot to this, but your white blood cells are a big part of muscle remodeling. And there is this second phase. It seems ironic, but your body actually induces some of the damage itself later because of the response. So it's not just the immediate mechanical response. There's a metabolic phase to this. The good news is all those soldiers, those white blood cells that normally protect you from bacteria, things like that, viral infections, although that's a different ballpark right now. But the soldiers become medics. And they can secrete growth factors and help with tissue turnover and all that kind of stuff. So the inflammatory phase, and then, it's part of the growth response. And so, yeah, you did 1,000 negatives, essentially. I don't know. Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just had a question for you. Is there anything, because I've thought about this too, with so Cal Dietz will use like a triphasic training where you'll emphasize an eccentric portion of the exercise for a week or two. Do you think there's anything that's useful to do in that case? So like in the listener's question, now that he's sore, or that you're going to do some eccentric work on purpose in terms of recovery or supplements or anything that may help that process?
Well, we're going to touch on this after the break because there's some news that NSAIDs like ibuprofen, aspirin, right, because they interfere with some of the neutrophils getting down in there, they interfere with the inflammatory process, they might actually hamper gains. In fact, Jorn Tromelin was just tweeting about this. So I'm going to save that till after the break. But the point is, just killing the pain, with an analgesic med, like over-the-counter med, is not going to help really, other than just make it not hurt. Honestly, Matt, I like to be sore. To me, that's growth. I know it doesn't correlate exactly with all the different markers of recovery, the soreness, but take it for what it is. And maybe that's, that's the kind of thing, it kind of emphasizes to me why you change up your stimuli every once in a while. If all you do is like seated calf raises and you're focused on the soleus, something like that, then, doing stairs is a different ballpark. You might activate, your gastroc or some of the, assisting muscles and that kind of stuff. Just take it for the growth that it is, all I can really say is feed the muscles the next day, protein, carbs, fats, whatever, energy and protein, essentially. I think there might be something to curcumin, as a mild anti-inflammatory kind of thing that might not interfere. Fish oils, maybe. Mike, you and I saw in Spain about how the fish oils, right, they don't affect the resolution. Ultimately, they can help with they can calm parts of this over-aggressive inflammatory process because, Matt, I bet you're going to concur. This feels over-aggressive, like you're wrecked. I know what it's like. We all know what that's like, using a handrail to get up and down stairs the next day, stuff like that. So,
I think in that talk, too, they talked about possibly combining aspirin and not NSAIDs or acetaminophen for different resolution of that part because the drugs were affecting a different portion of that resolution, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right, exactly. The aspirin, actually, what I remember, seemed to be less interfering
Right.
than ibuprofen, which is, really strong. Although I know Phil for years has used ibuprofen. I have too. Let's save that for after the break, though, because this study that just came out exactly deals with this. So, but yeah, that's what happened. It was just a novel stimulus, and it is an eccentric stimulus, and of course, lengthening contractions like that is what makes you sore. In my dissertation, I ran people downhill, a steep downhill grade on a treadmill for 45 minutes, and they were ruined. I mean, ruined. That was the lighter one. Let me go on to the harder one because I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Let me open this up here. So he says, this is Dave. He says, thanks for getting back to me. Sorry, this is the reason I'm reaching out, but basically I've been avoiding spinal fusions and bracing, and he's trying to use diet and exercise and rest. He's got some back problems. Trying to avoid having surgeries until it's absolutely necessary. Trying to avoid really strong pain meds, like that. He says his pain management doctor is a pussy, so he's just trying to give him too many, palliatives maybe. He said a former colleague had mentioned maybe trying even to work with a doctor and get on growth hormone to help his back degeneration. So he's got degenerated discs and things like that. He says at this point I'm just researching everything I can. Can you give me any tips? And I just said off the top of my head, I've had 2 former students actually get stem cell therapy for disc degeneration. And I know that's, I don't know all of the problems that Dave is having, but they have remarkable results. Now, Dave's got some scoliosis and things like that. And I think it's important to know that lateral curvature of your spine, when it gets to a certain degree, advancement, severity, it becomes progressive. And physical therapists know that. So I think he's trying to prevent this, right, from progressing to a more and more curved spine, more and more back problems. If I remember right, Dave, and you can email me later and correct me, but I think some of your initial injuries were you were doing really heavy bent rows. But again, that was back in the day. So Dave did get back and say, I had stem cell injections in 2015, and I concur it was the best thing I've done so far. Mike, what do you think? So he's at chronic back problems, scoliosis, intervertebral disc degeneration. You know a lot. You did a lot of cadaver work, right? You've seen this for real, up close. Any thoughts for Dave?
Yeah, a couple of things. I have my scoliosis is pretty good now, but I had very major scoliosis as a kid. In my case, or one thing I always tell people to look at or at least get screened for is there's probably something that may be driving that. And in my case, it was my eye position. So my right eye sits up and out farther. I don't see in 3D. I had a lazy eye as a kid and a whole bunch of stuff. So what happens in some of those cases is your body will basically kind of wind around the way your vision is, because we're very vision driven in general. So, seeing like a functional neurologist or even a behavioral optometrist may be worth a screening just to see if there's anything going on there that may be driving it. That's a little bit kind of out of the box, but I've seen that more often than not. So if I have someone come in who's got pretty big scoliosis, has some pain, obviously physical therapy, that stuff like that can be good, but it's amazing anecdotally how many of them have been found to have some pretty wonky visual stuff that they don't know about, right? Because if you've had it your entire life, it's like being colorblind. And what's the color purple? I don't know. I've never seen purple. I don't know what it looks like.
Interesting, right? Yeah.
You have nothing to compare it to per se. So outside of that, obviously Stu McGill's got a lot of good stuff. Picking up one of his books is probably worthwhile. If you talk to him about it, he's very big that surgery is definitely kind of a last resort. If you look at the data on surgery, I would say it's not super promising overall. And then just from an exercise standpoint, focusing on, are there certain things you can do, and then how do you feel after them? And for me, I noticed the more oddball looking the exercise and almost the more asymmetric it is, the better I feel and the better my movement was. So if you're pretty asymmetric to begin with, symmetric exercise, especially heavy loaded stuff, may not be your best friend, right? Because you're kind of pushing you back into those compensations and everything else. So, I mean, for a while, like I only did heavy Turkish get-ups on my left side, like for 2.5 years. And my right side didn't get any weaker, but every time I did them for a period of time, I felt a little bit better. So I would look at even something just kind of skewing stuff, maybe even one direction on the body for a while, and see how that goes.
Okay. Phil, I mean,
Yes.
you know, back problems are so common. How do you deal with that? I mean, you must have come across some of your guys either come to you with problems or, you know, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, I deal with it fairly often. I got one guy right now that he played college football, and of course, because of that, I mean, high school football, wrestling, on college wrestling, everything else. He has a degenerative disc issue. A lot of it that we end up working on is bracing things, learning how to brace correctly, and getting, I hate to use the term, but you know, bringing core strength up to par. So whatever you can to protect that spine. So
Okay.
I end up doing lots of like yoke walks and farmer's carries and things like that. The loaded carries and things like that tend to force you in a correct posture position without even thinking about it. When you're moving, you won't move with load in a incorrect position generally, and you will with like a squat, something that's static.
Okay,
A lot of people will overarch their lumbar and things like that. Yeah, so we end up doing a lot of core work and just relearning moves. You know, learning how to brace correctly. Start at step one. You know, lower the reps. Like I got one female that's a really high level now, but we just won't go above like 3 reps because form starts being. It could potentially be an issue, and it's not worth that issue. I would rather see like 10 sets of 3. So
Yeah.
and we can get the same work in if we have an existing issue, things like that. But generally a lot of just relearning and core work. So if we have a back issue going on.
Dave, I think, I mean, also, know, and he knows this, Dave's a smart guy. We're not medical doctors either, right? So, I mean, when Phil's explaining what he does from a strength perspective, right? So trying to correct some of these problems, but you also, I mean, I don't know. I got to think you could also farm around. You know, we're fans on this show of, you know, farming around people who are willing to try something, you know, new or progressive. You know, he had mentioned anabolic hormones and things like that. I mean, this is just anecdotal, but I've talked to a lot of high-end bodybuilders, and I can almost guarantee that their massive, you know, the strength of their soft tissue and all that stuff in place, it does pay dividends. You know.
Oh, yeah.
But having said that, yeah, I mean, I can't really comment any beyond that. But yeah, some type of, I mean, if let's say, for example, you're low testosterone over a very long period of time, you know, that's going to take a toll on your soft tissues and stuff like that eventually. So, yeah. Good luck to you.
One other thing I always have people ask, they're orthopedic, because orthopedics in general, just by their nature, tend to be very conservative. I mean, Phil can probably speak to this more than I can. Is if I continue to do this, am I going to make anything worse? Right? So if I take a period of, say, 6 months and I try some other stuff, am I going to be so wrecked that you're not going to be able to fix anything? Or am I just going to have 6 months of potential pain, and I'm not going to be any worse if you had to do a joint replacement or if you had to do something else? And that gives them an idea of what time frame they have to play with. Because if the doc says, no, man, if you continue to do stuff, you're going to shred everything so bad, it's going to be a real bitch to fix. Okay, now I don't have much time. But if he's like, 6 months or whatever, you're probably not going to make it any worse than what it is now.
Yeah.
That gives a person kind of a rough time frame to know, okay, I can do something for 6 months. In the worst case, I could have it replaced, or I could do something more invasive at that point.
It makes sense. That sounds like Phil's scenario,
sure.
right?
Oh, yeah, exactly like it. But I mean, I'm always a fan of do whatever you can and not go into the knife.
Yeah.
You know, if possible. You want to keep your original equipment as long as possible. So
agreed. Yeah, I mean, even this tooth surgery I had, they essentially put like it looks like a drywall anchor, up into my maxillary bone, like all the way up behind my nose. I didn't want to have this done. This is bullshit. This, I keep fussing about this retainer I'm trying to speak through and stuff, and but anyway, I'm permanently different. I can tell it's different, and we can all speak to that, right? Once you have a serious surgery, at least in my experience, if you're 80% happy with it, then that's probably good, right? You're never going to go back to exactly how you were before the problem. Surgeries leave you changed. So I agree with Dave's idea of, I don't want to just go in there and have some serious hardware put in. Yeah. So. Okay. I know there were some questions on Facebook. I've actually got one of them here on my phone. Let's take a look here. Phil, you had replied to this one. This was from Camille, I think. I think this may have been discussed in the past, but I don't remember. I'm having trouble reaching my daily protein target. I'm a classic carbivore, so she likes her carbs. If I take into account the protein I'm getting from carbs, like what's in the oats and the bread and that kind of stuff, I hit my daily target easily. But if I only count high-quality protein sources like meat, eggs, dairy, I usually fall short of the gram per pound. When tracking protein, what counts for you guys in terms of daily intake? Now, Phil, you responded to that. What did you say to her?
Pretty much, if you're getting a mixed diet, is what I told her, then you're good. I mean, she's got a good portion of it coming from meat and dairy. So go ahead and count the beans and the rice and things like that. As long as it, good part of it. Where I'd start to worry is if everything was coming from veg. Then you need to be a little more wary of, like you talk about all the time, mixing rice and beans and this and that. But I mean,
totally agree.
Yeah, she's probably not missing anything if she's getting, let's say, 70% of, even 60% of it is coming from meat and dairy.
Right.
Yeah.
As I recall, you said something about you're not going to be missing any particular amino acid, because you've got the high quality mixed in. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's pretend, and I don't know how big she is, but let's pretend she's like, I'm going to do this on top of my head. Let's say Camille weighs 140 pounds. That could be way wrong. So, I don't know, like low 140, so 60 kilo person, right? The literature is going to say 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kg. So let's take that 1.2, the low end, because she's struggling to get that gram per pound, at least of real high quality stuff. So 72 grams of protein a day is essentially what the literature would suggest for her, and she's getting that, right? I always count like 7 grams of protein in a serving of pasta, right? That's gluten, right? In fact, we're going to talk about that in the news after the break a little bit, but yes, I count that. Yes, I count the 5 grams of protein from oats, because exactly to your point, Phil, you mix it all in with all of the high quality complete proteins.
Yeah.
Absolutely you would count that. Mike, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with that. I mean, I've done both approaches. So if I have a new client and I know that it's going to be a little bit harder for them to make some nutritional changes, and I'm looking at their recall and their protein is just super low. I had a client like this just last week. And I know that the rest of their lifestyle is busy and I'm doing their training, so I'm having them change all of that. I may say like, hey, just get 4 meals, 30 grams of protein at each meal, and have that come from a complete source, right? So have, chicken, fish, blah, 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 whatever, knowing that they're going to get over that amount once they add up everything else. But I'm just purposely kind of having them focus only on that one thing. But if I have someone who's, a little bit more experienced and they're, tracking their macros or keeping track, then yeah, I'm just going to take whatever their total is. And if you're trying to hit a high total with like beans and rice, just really not going to happen in the real world. So
yeah,
yeah, count it all. Okay. Yeah, and don't feel bad. In fact, you talked about like a little more advanced idea. If you have access to body composition equipment and you can actually figure out your fat-free mass, some people might even eat grams of protein per pound or per kilo of fat-free mass, because that's what you're trying to feed. But yeah, these are kind of nuances, right? I like just like try to get yourself in that range just of overall body weight, mix in the high quality stuff, count all of it. That's sort of the short answer, yeah.
And most of the data, as you know, Lonnie, unless you're really skewed on the end of the spectrum in terms of body size, body weight and lean mass weight, they're kind of almost interchangeable in terms of counting number of grams of protein. But
Yeah.
I agree that it's, especially if you're 300 pounds and you're quite a bit overweight, then you're probably not going to need 300 grams, and then lean body mass is going to be much more useful then.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, that's right. All right. One last little tidbit before we go to break, and then we're going to talk about some of this, almost negativity, don't do this, and oh my gosh, don't do that, and we're going to get some practical input on it. But something that's going on with me right now is I'm finally using some HRV stuff myself, Mike. So I decided to start, looking at this stuff. My interest in this is not in just training load, right? Because so many of those devices, of course, are sold. If your HRV starts to go down, right, and you start to tank, it's because you're overtraining. I'm interested in the more almost raw data, if you will, and looking at sympathetic drive, period, and especially what different stimulants will do. So as we speak right now, I got my HRV this morning, which, by the way, you really got to follow what the app has you do with the breathing and calm down, because I actually just stood up and I kind of ignored the breathing part. And my HRV was 66. I'm like, oh man, I did have some alcohol yesterday, and that's going to be in the news, by the way. Maybe that's doing it, because I know you said that'll really lower your numbers. But then I sat down and I calmed down and I breathed with the device in and out, because that matters, and it was 89. That's good. That's a big difference, between those two things. But anyway, the point being is, I'm still interested in acutely, can I affect those numbers if we can do all these control issues the best we can, be as strict we can. Does having 2 cups of strong coffee or a caffeine pill, does it do anything to it immediately, acutely? That's kind of where I'm headed with a lot of this stuff. I think it's going to be a fun thing. Long story short, right now this morning I'm doing a little experiment. Does podcasting and lots of coffee lower my HRV? So just kind of a neat, different approach to that. I know I'm pushing the envelope with that, and that's not what it's commercialized to do, but I'll let everybody know.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and we're collecting data on that too, right? As you know, Mike, that we're going to continue that little project too. Stuff
with coffee on that is super interesting, because I'd be interested, once you have all the data collected, to just even an anecdotal pilot thing of what do people habitually use coffee for in terms of like a lifestyle. Are they just using it to relax on a Sunday morning? Or are they using it typically before lifting? And if those things kind of fall out of the data in any form.
To that point, I'll share it next week, but a paper came out almost identically with what we're doing. It's actually looking at, does your stimulant intake from Monster and specialty coffees and pills or pre-workouts, does it agitate you? Does it increase your movement? Right? And it just came out, and it addressed what in literally yesterday. Yesterday it came out. You couldn't even access it until yesterday. A student of mine found it. It's almost identical to what we're doing, and it addresses some of what you just said, Mike. Like, for what reasons were they doing this? So, because it is a neat idea, right? If the stimulants help you move that little bit more, that extra rep in the gym, walk all the way around the block to get somewhere, whatever it is, more activity generally considered kind of good, unless you're moving around and fidgeting at night, of course, while you're trying to sleep. But so I'll keep people posted on that too. Just kind of fun stuff. All right, let's go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a lot of things that lifters are exposed to, and we're now being told they're bad. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead,
all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book. But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more, that's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Alrighty, we're back. We're going to talk about several things. Here's the quick rundown, if you're interested. One is on NSAIDs, like ibuprofen and aspirin. One is coconut oil. One is alcohol in the news. And the last is gluten. So all of these things are getting some negative attention, and people are either trying to fix this quote-unquote bad thing or just warn people not to touch it. And we've all been exposed to all these things, of course, listeners and the co-hosts. Let me start with this first one. This was promulgated on Twitter. It's entitled Analgesic and Anti-Inflammatory Drugs in Sports, Implications for Exercise Performance and Training Adaptations, or if you prefer, gains. So Lundberg and Howitson were the authors on this paper. It says, over-the-counter analgesics, such as anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs, are widely consumed by athletes worldwide to increase pain tolerance, dampen pain, and reduce inflammation from injuries. It says NSAIDs have been demonstrated to inhibit cyclooxygenase, or COX, activity. So that's an enzyme that builds prostaglandin E2, for example. Which might explain the reduced anabolic response to exercise bouts. It says, consistent with this, NSAIDs, and again, we're talking about aspirin, ibuprofen, things like that, have been reported to interfere with muscle hypertrophy and interfere with strength gains in response to chronic resistance training in young individuals. But then they go on to say, it remains to be established whether any of these observations really translate into detriments in performance or reduced training adaptations in elite athletes. Now, this brings to mind, Phil, you and I both like our ibuprofen over the years. Are you still using ibuprofen regularly, and what are your thoughts? I can't think you're going to say that this is going to stop any muscular or strength progress.
I'll be taking 800 milligrams of ibuprofen right after the show.
There you go.
What I would say is show me an elite strength athlete that never takes it.
Yeah.
You probably can't.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty big. So
yeah.
From what I've seen in the real world, that doesn't pan out. Most elite athletes, and I can't speak personally on like NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey, but I guarantee you the majority of them are taking something along the lines of this.
Mm-hmm.
Just to battle daily, aches and pains. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it may look good in that lab, but in the real world, it's just not reality.
I can't help but think this is what Nick Bird would say, that acutely, yes, they suppress protein synthesis, but he even suggests, and he's not the only one, some of those Canadian guys are suggesting ibuprofen might actually be a mild anabolic agent in that it temporarily suppresses protein synthesis, but then cells have a natural corrective rebound. What got me about this one, though, is it's not just the acute. They're actually suggesting, interfere with hypertrophy and strength gains in response to chronic training in young individuals. But then again, they say that hasn't been really panned out in elite athletes.
Yeah. Just for the fact that it allows you to train at the level you need to, one would think it's beneficial.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I could go in today and I can squat 405, or I can take my 800 milligrams of ibuprofen and I can go in there and squat 7.
Right. And that's got to add up, right? Yeah, that's going to add up over time.
Yeah. So,
Mike, any cellular comments on this, or?
Yeah, I definitely want to read that study. It sounds fascinating. I've kind of gone back and forth on this over the years. So initially I was like, I don't think there's much that's going to screw up with the training adaptation chronically. I think there's definitely things that'll dampen it and possibly change it a little bit. But if you go back to like the super early mouse studies, if you provided enough overload, I mean, they put them on low protein diets, they castrated them, they cut out their hypothalamus, they did all this stuff. And of course, this is a model where the front limbs are massively overloaded. They pull up their little tail and they walk around on their front limbs all day. And in short, there wasn't anything they could do to them that would completely ameliorate the strength and hypertrophy response from that chronic loading model. Different things would help, right? So if you gave more protein, that definitely helps, but nothing would drive it to basically zero. There is some very acute data showing that, NSAIDs do seem to mess with those pathways. The one part that still sticks out to me is I saw Dr. Trappe present on this in 2010 at ACSM in Seattle. And at that time, everyone was kind of in agreement that, NSAIDs, they're really bad. They're going to screw with all your gains. And then basically they did a study in older people. And at the end of the study, they basically found that NSAIDs were mildly anabolic. And he was presenting saying that they thought they screwed up the data or they weren't compliant. And they actually had the subjects film themselves taking the medication. So they went back and they reviewed everything, went through the whole data again. And compliance was actually super high, and they couldn't find anything where they screwed up. But as we know, the muscle adaptations to resistance training are different in older people than they are young people, possibly anabolic resistance, different things like that. So I don't know. It's kind of where I'm at now. I mean, if I have an athlete, I would tell them, maybe personally, I try to avoid them as much at all possible. And that's for multiple reasons. But I don't know. I get nervous about anytime somebody says X, Y, or Z will completely blunt adaptations to strength training.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll change it a little bit, but that's just such a powerful stimulus that if your body wants to survive that, in Phil's case, 700-pound squat, we better do a lot of remodeling because, damn it, he's going to go back into the gym and do that thing again.
Yeah. I want to point out, I'm going to point people to this. This is Scandinavian Journal of Med-Sci Sports. The work, Lundberg, is from the Karolinska Institute, right? So this is hardcore. This is not just fly-by-night stuff. And yet, I agree with Phil 100%. My entire life, I have used ibuprofen, more or less, in anti-inflammatory doses, not just a little 200 milligrams, but, I'll take 600 or 800 milligrams, sometimes with an aspirin. And when I was trying to get larger, I did get larger. So I don't think I would have been 5'9" and weighed almost 230 pounds if that stopped it, right? Because I was all about that stuff. So when the rubber hits the road, I don't think that's going to happen. And of course, the guys Phil and the guys he works with are much larger than that. And if it stopped any kind of strength or muscle gains in its tracks, you wouldn't see what you see in the gyms and on the competitive platform.
Yeah, the practitioners, we would know it by now.
Right.
And we wouldn't be using them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're that high of an effect size, we would seek pretty clear evidence with all the lifters that people have been interacting with, and something that is relatively, I'd say, commonplace. So that tells you maybe there's an effect. It's just a lot smaller than what we think there is, or maybe there isn't an effect.
Yeah, and it seems there might be population specificity here. Again, there's a lot more to this abstract and this article. Please go look if you're really interested in this, listeners. But there seems to be population specificity. Like they're suggesting, I think, it might be more interfering in youth, or younger, more naive trainers as opposed to the elite ones, And to be fair, it may be the case that Phil and the guys that he trains and a lot of the bodybuilders I've seen, maybe they could have been a couple of percent larger or stronger had they not done it. It's hard to really tease that one apart, so it's worth to go look at the literature. But and of course, they talk about a risk to benefit analysis in this, and that's what everybody's going to have to decide for themselves, I guess. If you're getting more out of it than losing a couple of percent gains, and ultimately you actually have gains because of them, right? Because you were able to control pain. I can't say that's just a bad thing. Like I said, there is this sort of negativity that runs throughout a lot of this news. Now we're running low on time, so the next one was partly through the Facebook page. This was also labroots.com. Is coconut oil really all that? Brenda Kelly Kim wrote this. It says coconut's often praised, as a superfood in the veggie world, appreciated for health benefits, nutritional value. But recently, Karen Michaels, the director of the Institute for Prevention and Tumor Epidemiology at the University of Freiburg and professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, has basically called it poison. In fact, quote, pure poison, close quote. And a lot of it has to do with the idea that it's saturated fat, much like butter or lard, and that could be related to things like stroke or heart disease. And a lot of people are suddenly saying, from this comment, right, from this researcher's comment, I guess it's bad. Now, I don't think anybody's going to tell you that coconut oil has saturated fat, and it can, in fact, raise your LDL, your quote-unquote bad cholesterol, on some level. However, it's shorter chain, right? It's medium chains. I always consider coconut oil poor man's MCT oil, right? Because it's medium chain fats. It's not traditional long chain fatty acids like you see in a lot of dietary fats. In fact, 60% of coconut oil is medium chain, and you digest and absorb that differently. There's some suggestion that you might not even store it as fat quite as much, those medium chain type fats. But we've known this forever, in my opinion, and then, that it's saturated fat and it may raise your LDL a little bit. To me, my conclusion on this is, well, meh. If you're chugging it or eating it by the spoonful every day as your only fat source, only calorie source, well, just be aware that it's saturated fat and it may raise your LDL. But what do you think, Mike?
Yeah, it's the whole thing of anything that's negative seems to get real popular in the media like super fast. And it's usually anything that goes against what everyone currently believes. So if you go back, however many years, saying that coconut oil is a healthy fat, people kind of would lose their minds. Now they're like, coconut oil is really not that bad. And so now we're back to someone stating the same thing again, but a public opinion has kind of changed. So now it's contradictory again. And yeah, I haven't found anything that they did or any data that would tell me I need to change my mind or consider changing my mind, I guess.
Yeah. Phil, do you get your fats just from meats essentially, or oils? Do you have any concern about sat fat? How do you approach all that?
We add butter to things, like we use grass-fed butter. We'll use we eat a lot of saturated fat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's primarily
is.
what we add is saturated fat.
So there it is. Yep.
But,
I think yes, nobody's going to say that at least I'm not going to say the lipid theory of heart disease is completely bunk, and that cholesterol levels don't matter at all. Honestly, there's some very interesting data that in existence, and we've talked about this before. Steve Reichman, I think, did some of this stuff when he was at Kent State, and then later at Texas, I think. But there's even some beneficial things to having cholesterol levels in a certain range instead of just trying to drive them rock bottom all the time. Yes, cholesterol is a known driver, right, of atherosclerosis and that kind of thing, and saturated fat could raise it, but then you always get this confusing stuff, right? I guess my message to listeners is this is a complicated issue, and it's not as simple as, it's sat fat, all sat fats do the exact same things to your body, and it's all bad. No, it's not. And yet, there's pros and cons like anything else. Stu Phillips just tweeted this past week about how there are some detrimental effects of saturated fat on liver function, things like that, according to some new research. So, you can't live in a world where you're running from frickin' everything, Don't you dare touch aspirin or ibuprofen. Don't eat any saturated fat. Don't. These avoidance strategies drive me nuts, And like you said, Mike, the negativity bias is what people seem to gravitate to in the news.
And real quickly on that, I've often wondered if someone's baseline metabolism is just at rest, they're burning more carbohydrates, they're not having as much of the fatty acid turnover. So maybe if you provide a surplus of saturated fat, maybe it's possibly bad in that population versus, someone else who's good at using fat at rest. They're burning through a lot of that as fuel and it doesn't get pushed off into other tissues then. So maybe that may be something that may throw a monkey wrench into it and make it more complicated than this or that is just good or bad. Right.
Even genetics for how you respond to fats. There's definitely a nutrigenetic thing with fats. Yeah, definitely. That further clouds the issue.
Definitely.
All right, two more real quick. Is alcohol unsafe in any amount? This is also Brenda Kelly through LabRoots. This, she goes on, she says, a glass of red wine is good for you, we hear, or beer makes you smart. There's all these claims from various clinical studies on alcohol, but the latest research on alcohol published in The Lancet, which is a very high-tier journal, suggests there is no safe amount of alcohol, as in none. So it basically says, how can this be? They talk about a new study, big data, looking at millions of people, and how they've died from various causes. It says one of the statistics uncovered is that males aged 15 to 49, 12% of their deaths were due to alcohol use, linked to alcohol use. Dr. Emanuela Gacadau of the Institute for Health Metrics, University of Washington, is a senior author of this work. She explained, quote, the health risks associated with alcohol are massive. Our findings are consistent with other research, and she believes it's clear and convincing, the correlations there. Now, again, the key word being correlations, right? This isn't necessarily causal. It's big population stuff, but it is suggestive. Anyway, correlations between drinking and premature death, cancer, and cardiovascular problems. And then goes on to say zero alcohol consumption is what would minimize the risk. It also goes on to say that the study did not distinguish between beer, wine, or spirits. The common denominator was, of course, the ethanol. They defined a drink as 10 grams of alcohol per person per day. That amounts to a 3.5-ounce glass of wine, a standard can or bottle of beer, or a 1-ounce shot of whiskey. And then there's some other comments in here from other researchers explaining how extensive this data set was and this data analysis. They talk about compilation of hundreds of studies, both prospective and retrospective studies. And then it goes on to point at news sources, University of Washington and The Lancet. Again, I occasionally have a drink. I did yesterday. Phil, I know that you'll sometimes have a little bit of, you're like, I don't know, what is it? What did you drink? Some kind of brown liquor. When I came out, when I came out and we did a little thing for Strength Guild, I remember we actually sat around. I think we were nipping on whiskey while we were discussing it. You know,
we'll have whiskey or this or that. I'm not a big drinker. We'll go have a drink at dinner here and there, maybe once or twice a week.
Yep.
But I don't think that's going to set you back. I think if you were a habitual, alcoholic or something, yeah, of course.
Right.
You're going to have issues. But
Yep.
nobody's arguing that. But I think sitting down to a drink here and there isn't going to hinder anything at all.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Mike, I was just discussing with you. Now, you said it'll really lower your HRV numbers. The funny thing is you have an alcoholic drink or two to relax, and it could actually worsen your recovery score on like HRV. Can you comment on that at all? Or
Yeah, so what I've seen with that after looking at, oh Christ, probably in the thousands of HRVs on people now over the last 8-ish years, 6 years at least. One drink for most people, I won't see it in their score. Some people, right around 2 drinks, a lot of times I will. 3 drinks, definitely. And it's funny because I'll see HRV looks good, training volume, everything looks good. I'll see their HRV tank. And it took me a while to figure out. So now the first question I'll ask them is, did you drink it all last night? Because I don't see anything that looks different. And usually, 2 drinks will do it. Oddly enough, sometimes the type of alcohol in some people will. Like one client in particular, red wine will mess her HRV score. We're testing out white wine and some other stuff right now. I haven't noticed a pattern of one alcohol more than another one in terms of type. Some of the clear alcohols seem to be not as bad, just purely anecdotal. Another part about alcohol that's interesting too is if the study looks at like harm to self or potentially also harm to others. So a study actually in the Lancet from 2010 from David Nutt, he did this. It's drug harms in the UK, multi-center decision analysis. And they were looking at, well, what is a potential harm to others in society and things of that nature? And they actually ranked out of all drugs, they ranked alcohol was number 1.
oh,
actually above heroin and, oddly enough, crack cocaine.
Wow.
Because of the altercations when people would drink a large amount, the altercations and other things that they would get into. Of course, he promptly got fired as the person in charge of drug research in the UK because they hated that that answer. But if anyone's worked at a bar or spent time in a bar between midnight and 2 a.m., yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Right, that's right. Yeah, the epidemiology stuff, and again, no one is saying, right, saturated fat has no downside or alcohol has no downside or NSAIDs have no downside. But to me, it's like anything else in life. It's a calculated risk and a decision. It's a pros and cons decision that we all make.
Yeah.
But am I willing to give up all alcohol because researchers in a premier journal like the Lancet are saying, 0 is best? No, I'm not. At my stage, like, let's face it. I tell young athletes this all the time. Alcohol is just not part of a training diet. Right? So if you're in the middle of a season, I actually agree with a lot of the sports teams where they have a no alcohol policy. There's not much it's going to do for you, as strictly as part of a training diet. But having said that, when you're on a relaxation part of your diet, maybe your training load's a little lighter, or like I'm at a stage in my actual career where I'm going to enjoy life here and there. And if that means eating real butter or some coconut oil, I love coconut, actually, taste-wise, or having a drink, or even 2 or 3. Like Phil said, I don't do that every day. I mean, I don't even think I do that every week. But I'm not going to feel panicked when I do. It's just a balance.
Yeah, especially younger adults in general have a harder time regulating behavior, especially related to alcohol. That doesn't mean all of them. That just means in general compared to older adults too.
It's true. I mean, what are we doing? We're giving our salty veteran, outlook on this stuff because, you've been around the block a few times and you're like, well, you can mitigate some of these risks by just not overdoing it, and this is what not overdoing it means, stuff like that. One last thing, because I know we're over and Phil's off to the gym. On gluten, I promised I would mention something. This is from the Institute of Food Technologists, IFT.org. Research targets wheat's quote-unquote bad gluten. So gluten makes up 3/4 of the protein, like we were talking about in wheat products, like pasta, And we know that gluten can cause intestinal damage and even cardiovascular problems for people with celiac disease, and maybe even people that don't have celiac disease. There could be some level, like subclinical kinds of issues, and I understand that. This is what's neat about this little news bit, though. Not all gluten in wheat is considered equal. So researchers are trying to leave in the less offensive parts of the gluten protein, so you can get what you want out of the dough, because that's what makes it rise and and have structure, that is, and that kind of thing, and then remove some of the problematic parts. So basically, there's 3 main forms of gluten in wheat that they explain in this IFT paper. According to Raj Ketkar, Ketkar, president and CEO of Arcadia Biosciences. So he says high molecular weight glutenins are about up to 10%, 5 to 10% of total gluten. They're very important for giving that strength and elasticity to dough, so having good, baked products. Low molecular weight glutenins are up 25 to 30% or so of gluten in wheat, also important for processing dough. The third category, though, and Mike, you and I know this, gliadin. Right? Gliadin is 60 to 70% of wheat's gluten, and that's what causes that sort of allergic, immune, adverse response. This quote-unquote bad gluten is that gliadin portion of the protein. And essentially what they've done is reduced 75% of that gliadin. So they're leaving in some of the high molecular weight glutenins or even lower ones, and they're trying to remove just that offensive protein that's causing the problems, either in celiac patients or even, the Gen Pop who might have some subclinical issues with this. What we've done, explains Ketkar, is reduce 75% of the allergic glutens. So that might be something that catches on, people can look for in the future too, because gluten is one of those things that confuses the heck out of people. You walk into a health food store, we have one here in town, literally, like if you look left, low-carb food items that have a lot of gluten. Like if you're going to go buy low-carb bread, oftentimes there's quite a bit of gluten in that stuff. And then you look right, and it's the gluten-free stuff, right? And if anybody even begins reading labels, they're going to be like, well, these labels say low-carb and high gluten is good. These labels say no gluten is good. Which is it? Is gluten good or bad? So I think these guys are trying to define, let's target that particular gliadin protein and reduce it so we can still have delicious baked goods, and carbohydrate kinds of products, and not trigger any of these symptoms. Any thoughts on gluten, Mike, from you?
Yeah, in general, I agree. If you look at the data, there's a pretty cool review in JAMA from last year. It's public access, celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, a review. The author's last name is Leonard. They did a pretty good job of kind of breaking it down for people who want more information. In practice, I don't know. I've just seen clients who appear to have a gluten sensitivity. My wife is one of them. So we've, tested her on different types of gluten, and I've even, I don't know, she's not listening to this right now, but snuck it into her food and taken it out just to see what happens also.
Oh my. Experimenting on your spouse. Shame on you.
Yeah, well, little wifey experiments.
Right.
She probably won't be surprised by that. But in her case, like, mood sensitivity and stuff is dramatically changed, like, that day and the next day. I've had some clients just take it out and they feel a lot better, even though self-report, I can't see any other change in their data. So I think most people are probably not as sensitive to it as they think. And there's some interesting data on that with placebo effect and things of that nature. But I have seen some people where, we've played around with it off and on for, my wife's case for, probably 8 years now, and it seems to be something there. So I tell people, I'm like, I wouldn't be afraid of it, but just, test it out on yourself, see how you feel and kind of go from there.
Right on. Yeah, I think it's
celiac. You'll definitely know if you're celiac. So you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, yeah. It gets way overblown. We've all seen those videos. They'll interview people, fitness-minded people that are on gluten-free diets. And, of course, when you go gluten-free, you tend to eat less bread and pasta and a lot of carbohydrates, so your calorie intake goes down a lot of times. And, if you're eating, like, green leafies instead. And so many times people, they're so passionate about the gluten-free thing, and they can't even tell you, like the reporter will say, why do you do it? And they can't even really tell you. Oh, it's just bad, And like you said, it's I've actually looked. It's a small single-digit percentage of the population. Last I looked, at least, that was actually diagnosed like celiac. And obviously, like you said, those people, they totally need it. They probably love this low gluten craze because, from rice checks to God knows what. I mean, a lot of things have whole grocery sections, in the aisles of the grocery store, gluten-free. And those people must be loving it because they have more options now, But a lot of people, they don't even know why they're avoiding it. And I mean, in my household, Kelly and I, we do reduce the amount of pasta and that kind of stuff we eat. We're not trying to avoid gluten specifically, just not too many carbs. I mean, we're middle-aged, and yet that does remove a fair amount of gluten, when you don't eat a lot of bread and pasta. So it depends if you're young and, you need the carb calories. I am sort of on a kick, though. More potatoes and rice. I think they're very clean starches. That's a really loaded word, I know. But a little bit less to deal with as far as this other, gluten issue. I eat a lot of oats, though. It's worth noting, though, that corn gluten and oat gluten are different in a lot of ways. And in some guidelines, not really nearly as much of a concern, right, as something like wheat, barley, whatever. So,
yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I use a lot more white rice now, potatoes, and the reality is, if I'm doing nutrition stuff with clients, those are probably the ones I'm gonna go to, just because I know they're inexpensive, they're easy to get, they have some other benefits, and if they had any other sort of weird gluten stuff that I don't know about, we're probably reducing it. And if it's something they want to test out in the future, then it's, we'll test it out, from there.
Yep. All right, everyone. So there you have it. I didn't want to poo-poo everything that's in the news, but I do think there's this gut reaction. And to your point, Mike, I think you said it best. People gravitate toward negative things like warnings, that balk the trends. But things like coconut and gluten, they, good, bad, it can get very confusing. So at least there's some info, on and some opinions, right, on what we think about a lot of this stuff, from alcohol to whatever. So all these supposed no-nos coming out of nowhere, and like everything, I would think it's a calculated risk.
Yeah, and last point too, if you want to get super confusing, you could argue that maybe alcohol and other things are a little bit of a hormetic stressor. Maybe they stress your body just a little bit and make you possibly better for it if it's a certain amount and under a threshold and blah, blah, blah.
Right, yeah, like that mild adaptation. Like they say, living with a dog is going to present you certain
Right.
immune challenges, and it's almost certainly good. Stuff like that. So, all right, well, we'll call it a week. So thanks, man.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
See you.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at ironradio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry. And they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.